They taught us the headline. Germany overran France in 6 weeks. Fast tanks, loud planes, a panicked retreat. That's true, and it's the easy version. The harder, more important fact is quieter. The German victory wasn't merely about weapons or luck. It was an argument made in motion, an argument about tempo, about decisions, and about how an army uses time itself as a weapon. Today, we're not just retracing battles. We're tracing an idea, how movement, command, and a ruthless willingness to turn systems meant for peacetime order into instruments of sudden collapse. Most viewers picture the fall of France as a single, spectacular failure, exposed flanks, blitzing panzers, and then Dunkirk's frantic evacuation. That description is accurate in parts, but it leaves out why a modern, large European army disintegrated so fast. The real story sits in the space between doctrine and decision. How armored units, air power, radios, and a command culture that rewarded initiative combined with strategic choices that let the Wehrmacht steer the crisis. If we start with that, the campaign stops being a parade of tragedies and becomes a coherent, terrifying demonstration of what modern warfare could do when every lever of military organization was pulled at once. Power changes when it becomes portable. In peacetime, institutions learn to value stability, plans, approvals, checks. Speed, when it's tolerated, is accidental. The moment speed is given purpose, it stops being a lapse and becomes a discipline. That discipline shows itself not in a single battle, but in how an army thinks about the interval between orders and action. Germany didn't simply go faster than its opponents. It reorganized command so that movement itself carried information. Commanders trained to operate under a principle that favored decentralized initiative and rapid, iterative decisions. Radios meant that frontal velocity could be coordinated. Doctrine meant that junior commanders could act without waiting for permission. In practice, this changed the arithmetic of war. If you could act where your enemy hesitated, you could force him to react again and again until his coherence collapsed. That doctrine had names and faces. Officers like Heinz Guderian argued that tanks must be supported by infantry, artillery, and aircraft, not operate as isolated striking tools. Panzer divisions were organized to combine armor, motorized infantry, engineers, and artillery in single formations. Radios in tanks and command cars let spearheads push simultaneously on multiple axes. When German formations crossed a river or punched a gap, that gap wasn't merely a hole in a line. It was a corridor the Germans used to funnel speed, logistics, and decision cycles. The French and British, by contrast, often built around centralized control and slower, rigid staffs. Their units waited for orders. German units learned to make them. Maps lie until you look for the seam. For the Allies, the obvious seam was the Low Countries. The flat plains of Belgium and the Netherlands offered an open field where a defending army could engage armor head-on. That expectation shaped plans, deployments, and assumptions about where the decisive action would fall. The Germans accepted the obvious expectation. Then they exploited the seams elsewhere. Rather than putting their main strength through northern Belgium's open plains, they put strategic weight through a corridor that opponents judged marginal, the Ardennes. That forest was not impenetrable, but it was mischaracterized. By choosing the difficult axis, Germany forced the Allies to chase the apparent threat, while the true blow formed where it would be least expected. The heart of the campaign was a choice, full Gelb refined into Manstein-Sichelschnitt, the sickle cut. In mid-May 1940, armored formations pushed over the Ardennes, reached the Meuse, and struck at Sedan. On May 13th, German armored formations crossed the Meuse near Sedan and within days poured west toward the Channel. That crossing, not just a tactical success, but an operational rupture, severed Allied lines and allowed German High Command to exploit interior lines. The Maginot Line, mighty as it was, became irrelevant. The Germans bypassed the fixed defenses and used the interior to collapse the Allied front from the rear. War feels chaotic. The illusion of chaos comes from isolated facts, a blown bridge, a delayed order, a misread report. But effective armies make chaos useful. They convert chance into opportunities. The question is, which services, air, armor, infantry, artillery, talk to each other, and how fast? What made the German advance unstoppable wasn't only rapid tanks, nor was it only bombing. It was the operational marriage of armored maneuver and close air support, plus logistics that could follow a moving spearhead. Each element was supporting the others as a system rather than operating in a chain of command that insisted on long pauses for permission. Luftwaffe units provided reconnaissance and interdiction, targeting columns, bridges, and concentrations. Dive bombers attacked points of resistance and paralyzed movement. Panzer formations exploited gaps fast enough that Allied rear areas were overrun before defenses could consolidate. Germany's supply system was lean and focused. Mobile fuel trains, captured supplies, and rapid repair parties. The French army depended on slower resupply and heavier artillery logistics, and the British Expeditionary Forces lines were extended by their advance into Belgium and then cut. Where the Allies expected to fight a static battle, they found themselves defending a retreating line that had the momentum of a machine. Two armies can have similar equipment. Their difference often lies in how orders travel and what a subordinate is allowed to do with them. One culture prizes vertical control. The other prizes local initiative. That choice colors every battlefield decision. German command doctrine, influenced by Auftragstaktik, emphasized intent over prescription. Commanders set objectives and allowed subordinates flexibility in execution. The French and British command structures were more cautious and staff-driven, emphasizing centralized planning and formalized orders. In a campaign defined by tempo, the ability to improvise at lower echelons is decisive. German tanks and leaders used radios to communicate changes in real time. When a German commander saw a gap, he exploited it without waiting for a written order. On the Allied side, delays in communication, compounded by layered command chains, meant that by the time an order arrived, the opportunity had passed. High commands clung to set plans. The dial plan, the deployments behind river lines, even as the operational reality shifted. That cognitive lag amplified the physical one. While German units reshaped the battlefield, Allied headquarters struggled to reframe it. Doctrine does more than dictate how units fight. It structures how generals interpret reports and whether they accept newer possibilities. If doctrine says, "We will be attacked here," reports from an unexpected direction are often dismissed as noise. French and British staffs were anchored in pre-war assumptions. The Maginot Line represented a psychological comfort, defense as insurance, political and strategic calculations, preserving industrial centers, avoiding civilian casualties, maintaining lines to the sea, constrained the scope of immediate tactical choices. The Germans, by contrast, used doctrine to expand the set of possible actions, which meant they were less surprised by their own audacity. Operational misreadings compounded. Belgian resistance faltered faster than expected. Counterattacks were piecemeal. Crucial reserves were committed at the wrong place and time. When German spearheads smashed through at Sedan and pushed northwest, Allied attempts at local counterstroke often arrived late or in insufficient strength. The resulting pattern was simple. As German units moved faster, Allied cohesion thinned until entire corps were isolated by speed rather than destroyed by attrition. Air power doesn't just bomb, it shapes freedom of movement. If an army can use the sky to deny roads, clear fields, and strike columns, it turns terrain into an enemy's trap. The Luftwaffe, in 1940, served multiple operational purposes: reconnaissance, close air support, and interdiction. It targeted bridges, columns, and gathering points, not only to kill men, but to freeze movement. That made stopping German mechanized columns enormously difficult. Roads became contested spaces under persistent aerial observation and attack. German dive bombers, Stukas, and fighter bombers struck withdrawal routes, rear areas, and concentrated formations. This kept Allied movements disjointed. Motorized columns slowed, convoys paused under fire, and commanders hesitated. Effective close air support didn't always destroy armor. Sometimes it prevented armored divisions from forming coherent defensive positions. The psychological effect, too, was real. Units on the move or retreat recorded losses and delays that multiplied cumulatively. War is machines and maps, but it's also men. Their training, expectations, and morale shape how quickly they adapt to disaster or opportunity. Training isn't just skill transmission. It's a way of teaching a response habit under stress. German forces invested in training that emphasized independent action and the practical use of radios. Junior officers were taught to think in terms of objectives rather than rote orders. French and British training, shaped by pre-war doctrines and the lessons of World War I, emphasized set-piece operations and careful staff planning. When the unexpected arrived, German subordinates improvised. Allied subordinates looked for instructions. That difference surfaced in the chaos after the Meuse crossings. German tank crews kept moving, repairing, improvising. Small unit leaders seized bridges and held them until reinforcements arrived. Allied units, confronted by new threats and disrupted communications, often withdrew in a planned way, but their withdrawals lacked the aggressive counteraction that might have slowed the German tempo. The result was not mere retreat. It was retreat under pressure until command structures unraveled. Every rapid advance has a point of diminishing returns: fuel shortages, stretched lines, and exhausted troops. An advancing army must convert tactical success into sustainable advantage or risk a sudden stop. The German operational art accepted short-term risk in logistics to gain strategic returns. Mobile units lived off captured supplies when necessary, and the Wehrmacht's logistics were oriented to keep the spearhead fed for just enough time to break the enemy's will. The Allies, with longer, heavier supply systems and slower logistics, were less able to adapt to a theater defined by rapid maneuver. By late May, German columns had driven to the Channel and cut the Allied armies in two. The northbound pocket, containing many British and French formations, was no longer defensible in the normal sense. It faced encirclement. What followed was a frenetic evacuation at Dunkirk that saved many soldiers but left heavy equipment behind. Conquest of territory, not mass destruction, became the German objective, shaping a political picture that made continued resistance costly and precarious. France fell quickly, not because German soldiers were uniquely savage or because their tanks were simply better. It fell because a modern army converted tempo into a weapon, and because its adversaries were often unwilling, institutionally and doctrinally, to treat tempo as the central variable. The campaign demonstrated that in mechanized war, time is not passive. It is a resource to be spent or hoarded. When you spend it rapidly and coherently, you force your enemy into a succession of decisions and reactions until his system, stretched and misaligned, breaks. There is a final lesson that quiets the spectacle. Technologies and formations are tools, not destiny. Doctrine, communication, and command culture decide whether technology is decisive. In June 1940, the Germans combined doctrine and decision to make technology sing. The collapse we watched was not inevitable, but it was avoidable. Had different choices been made about where and how to move, and how much discretion to grant those on the ground. If there is any comfort in this history, it is that the methods that toppled France are visible, nameable, and therefore discussable. Understanding them doesn't make what happened any easier to bear, but it does reveal that wars are won as much by the machines that organize men and time as by the machines that kill them.